Pretty good turnout, really. I know it's been kind of a lengthy process, and we're coming closer to the end, so this is a good thing. Today we are looking at a few different things. We're looking at the public survey that's on your desk right now. Just real quick, a few questions. If you haven't gotten one, there should be plenty. You can take your time to fill it out now or later through the meeting if you feel that'd be fine. But that's one thing to cover. But in the interest of time, I think we'll move on to one of our 3 chapters we'll be covering for today. First chapter we'll be covering is future land use. The future land use chapter is really kind of, in a sense, an implementation of some of the other core chapters that we've looked at already. We've identified 4 different areas to look at and how to plan the land use of the county. The agricultural production area, which on this map is everything that's white. The transition area, which on the map is everything that's in this kind of cream color yellow. It's mostly surrounding the cities and towns, and a few other pockets like Wall Lake and Renner, Lyons is also a transition area. Rural service areas, which are the points that are specific dots, such as this big purple dots, red and purple, and then there are smaller dots that are at intersections, and we'll be covering this in a little bit. And then development corridors, which is going to be a little bit further planning, is basically what the development corridors is, to mimic the Red Rock corridor development along several other access highways to Sioux Falls and surrounding communities. So, the agricultural production area. Agriculture is the largest land area of the county. So it's very important in land mass and for economics purposes to keep the agricultural going. The purpose of this district is to protect, preserve, promote agricultural uses in an economic and its economically viable operations. Typically in this area we want to see large-scale farms and all sorts of farms, including crop productions, animal production, and the like, and other operations that consist with it. We'll also like to see small-scale farms as well. That is an acceptable use in this area, which would be hobby farms as well as food production farms for local consumption, for like vegetable farming and that sort of thing. In this area, sand, gravel, and stone mining is going to continue in the next 20 years, and it would be very acceptable to have in this. We will still have single-family detached dwellings populated in this area as the density zoning allows. And then institutional government uses and recreation kind of go together. That is becoming a more important part of future county planning, so that will be a major use in the agriculture area. But since we covered more or less a whole chapter on agricultural, this land use section ended up being a little small as part of this chapter. Transition areas. Transition areas, basically the area around cities and communities. And this has the primary purpose of maintaining the rural landscape until the eventual development of the land. The transition area will not necessarily be transformed into an urban area in the next 20 years, but it's keeping the distance and the proximity is keeping some of the very heavy, say, animal confinement uses a little further back to prevent any sort of conflict between the municipalities and our agricultural production. So the typical uses in the transition area would be large-scale farms that are existing. And this is also a very good area for, say, small-scale farms and ag tourism, since it would be a short drive outside of the city to these production areas for local food and tourism. Greenhouse and nursery type productions. Single-family dwellings are still going to be done in this area as the density zoning allows. Existing residential developments, many of these transition areas already have pockets of densely residential areas, and they will be allowed to continue, and in some cases expand if there's correct utilities and available to them. And then again, institutional and recreational use is going to be an important part of the transition area as well. Rural service areas are specific points more than they are areas on the map. If we go back, I'll show you the map again. They are generally located at intersections of major highways. So a state highway, county highway, or the interstate and a highway. And they're also community types. So there's the two types, intersection and community type. This implementation, the intersection types are pretty self-explanatory. They're going to be there for convenience purposes. They're there for because the intersection allows for lots of traffic to be seen and turn them down to these places. Community types are generally places that were former communities or are becoming community-like. I've identified these rural service centers that are community type: Corson, Ellis, Lyons, Renner, Rowena, and Wall Lake as community type rural service centers. The typical uses will change based on the rural service area. The agricultural support businesses will continue to be a primary use of it, such as at Lyons, you have the large elevator right next door, and you also have the Rosenbauer as well. So those are both usable type services in the rural service areas. Limited convenience commercial areas, single-family detached dwellings as density zoning, and also rural developments where sanitary, sewer, and utilities exist. And that's part of the reason why I say Wall Lake is considered a community-type rural service area, because it has facilities available to grow in a fairly economical and environmentally safe way. Small parcel farms in these areas are going to be, and greenhouses are going to be important in this sort of area as well. So yeah. And then development corridors. I don't know how else to put it, but I guess this is one way to say that we're going to kind of punt this one a little bit, because each development corridor is unique in how the land use is already set up. As these highways extend from different communities, we want to try to, but the core idea is to help prevent strip-style development. Make a planned development where there's clear relationship between land uses and roads to get to these. But through this, each development is going to have public participation in that development. And typical areas, uses will be dependent on the general area. So, yeah.
And just some of the, I'm going to be brief on the transportation section, but one of the things that I went over with, I don't know if you got a chance to look at the draft chapter yet, and just generally, I'm just going to skip forward here a second to rail transportation, really bringing out that significance of rail transportation. Mention some facts from the South Dakota State Rail Plan and just the impact that that'll have, and just being able to maintain that system, and having those connections to the regional and national system will not only benefit agricultural producers and other businesses and the like, which brings me to that second point as far as supporting improvements for rail transportation access across the state. I know the governor has mentioned a couple of in other parts of the state. but definitely improving those access points, which for the most part, rail transportation is significant in this area. But as in prior years and recent decades, and even earlier than that, it was more of a player in the regional national economy, and should continue to be. Another thing that was mentioned was the possibility of passenger rail connections to the national network, and connecting that to Minneapolis. But in terms of that would be costly, just exactly what I read. It's more of one of those things where it's an exploration of doing that into one of the urban growth centers.
And Fargo would be closer, wouldn't it?
Fargo would be.
Fargo.
So I know they mentioned the line that would come from Minneapolis to Wilmar down to Sioux Falls instead of going to Sioux City, because it doesn't necessarily have that population. I think it's a little bit further up in terms of their classifications. Minnesota, their rail plan mentioned it. In South Dakota, there was a brief mention in that plan in 2010. As far as the highways,
Fargo already has passenger rail.
Amtrak.
They have Fargo, don't they?
Yeah, all the way to Minneapolis.
And as far as highways, I think that pretty much speaks for itself. As far as Kevin mentioned, addressing those development corridors where that projected population growth is to occur, especially around Sioux Falls and Brandon, Del Rapids, Hartford. And that's just that growing importance to help maintain, especially bridges and improve infrastructure to help meet those demands. And then continue to control the access points onto highways in terms of limiting the amount of residential driveways on the highways, which that's more of a continuance more than anything. Some of the goals are laid out. And another key aspect is it's just recognizing the importance of regional and national movement, nationwide movement of non-motorized transportation planning. And in order to do this, I think, and just from what I've pulled out from some of the meetings and just some of the input that I've been looking through, is identifying those connections to municipal trails and routes through pathways and potentially minimum 4-foot wide shoulders where feasible, of course. And I think one of the key ways to do this, just from my experience, is to explore the development of citizen-led work groups as kind of an action step within one of those goals to help promote non-motorized transportation, recreation. And this is more of a municipal thing as far as air transportation. But just another thing to note was that the number of private airports is increasing slowly, so just continuing to make those adequate provisions to ensure that we make headway in this compatibility between different uses. The third section we decided to throw in there was implementation. It's laid out a couple of drafts there. It includes some of the public facilities. Those aren't included on there. Most of the stuff that's in there is the government facilities, but and just laying those out, tried to lay out what we would need to do. How do we make the comprehensive plan and the zoning ordinance speak to each other and have that relationship? And Kevin, I don't know if you want to take the rest of it.
No, I guess the implementation portion of it was more, we don't have much of a presentation for it because it's kind of, from what we have written there, it's kind of, this is what we have ready to go. So, yeah.
I've got a question on the off-road transportation stuff. Has any, of course things always end up boiling down to dollars and stuff, but has Sioux Falls itself, have we ever looked in the city at, like the bikes they have in Minneapolis and Washington, D.C. and Chicago and such that, you pick them up at one spot, you put your credit card in, and you drop them off at another spot and they charge you. And I don't know if that's a money-making proposition for those cities or if that, how they're coming out on those. But if that would be something that would generate income for implementation improvement of off-road bike trails and this and that, it might be worth investigating. I wonder about that as a revenue source that, you know, bike trails paying. And I look at the tourism industry, you know, in Iowa, how much they make with that, what's that, rag ride they have? They bring in a ton of money out there, or in Iowa. Nebraska's bringing in a lot, Minnesota is. If we could increase our tourism through bike trails, and basically tourism has been a non-subsidized industry in South Dakota, but we bring in about $2 billion last year in tourism.
Yeah, even something like the Nicholson Trail is one thing we have in mind for any sort of rails or trails sort of thing that could be a possibility. Is that they just put a gravel trail down a railroad line, and there you got a bike trail.
Well, and I think the National Guard did a lot of that. So during some of the summer camps, if we can utilize National Guard for doing some of that stuff too. But and even connecting some of the parks, you know, with the bike trails, it would make it nicer in our state, and it could generate revenue for our state. Both.
So you're talking something beyond the Tour Dakota that's already established?
Yes. Yes. They bring in a lot of money in our surrounding states, and we kind of. And when I talk to bicyclists from other states, they wonder why we're not doing more. You know, and I think the laws are when a contract goes out for rebuilding a highway, they are supposed to have so much for bicycle room on there. And, you know, I think it gets kind of, I don't know how scrutinized that is, but I think there is legally supposed to be in the state for contracts for new highway buildings. It would have been so neat to have a bicycle trail along Highway 19 as it comes from Madison down to Hartford. And, you know, you have that little jog from Hartford that comes over, you know, connecting some of these towns, Yankton and Vermillion, you know, Sioux Falls and Devil Rapids.
The way this last year's once you'd had more people driving on that bike path the way 19 was.
Yeah.
That's a disaster.
But those are things that could really enhance our county and our state.
Well, the key is the maintenance of those facilities, because I worked on the Highway 17 project, and they wanted bike trails out along there. But the state will build those facilities, but we need to have commitment in terms of maintenance, because we don't fund the maintenance of those facilities. So that's where the tough part comes in, is like in the city of Sioux Falls, you know, it snows, they go out and they plow those. People are riding on those trails year round. Personally, I'd be like, it's snowing, I'm not even thinking about riding a bike. But there are people in our community that do. You know, so the state looks at that and says, okay, well now we have something to maintain. We don't, it's a funding and a time, and, you know. So unless you can get the counties for those facilities, those locations you're talking about, or the local community that's near the area, to be willing to come up with the funds to maintain those facilities, it's unlikely that those would be built going forward. They're wonderful ideas. I mean, I absolutely
have to generate. Everything takes money, and that's what I'm looking at. Okay, can we have these bikes rented out, or what could we do?
Yeah.
There's something else I wondered about. This just applies to money, but not specifically. When I was making calls before the elections, I was amazed at how many people said, "Oh, they didn't vote because they have their residents. You know, they call South Dakota their residents, but they don't live here, so they weren't very invested and felt like they really didn't know what was going on." And I think, okay, if it's so cheap, the licensure, be licensed in South Dakota, but yet they lived in Arizona or Florida or whatever, I thought, maybe that needs to not be quite so cheap to do, because there's a lot of people who have South Dakota residency licenses.
It's for the full-time people that RV. Is what that is.
It's people who are RVing all the time, and they license in South Dakota because it's cheap. Maybe it shouldn't be quite so cheap. Maybe we could raise the rates. So, anyway, just a thought.
Say as far as your bike trails go, you wouldn't have to maintain them, just turn them into snowmobile And Nebraska's done a lot of that. They call them iron horse trails, all over abandoned railroads. And they usually connect town to town.
Yes. I could see college kids riding from Brookings, you know, this isn't a Minnehaha company, of course, but Brookings to Madison, or Brookings to Sioux Falls, or Sioux Falls to, you know, I could see that. I don't know, but it's, yeah.
We ran into the same challenges. I was involved in a movement. I was the president of the commercial club in Garrison for 14 years. One of the positions you either have to die or move out of town to get out of. And we were involved with Brandon trying to do pennies for the path, we called it, trying to make a bike path to connect the Garrison parks and the Brandon parks. And we were able to do the same thing. We were able to come up with, I think, significant funding. We rattled a lot of people to get involved, and the long-term maintenance and liability was the kind of the showstopper when we got right down to it. And that's been a number of years ago already. So it was a similar type of thing. There was quite a bit of rallying done. That was when Highway 11 got redone. Come up with a solution for that piece of it, I think you could get more of it.
Which piece of it?
The liability and maintenance.
Liability and the maintenance.
The liability? Well, there are some other mechanisms, or legal mechanisms, through the liability portion of it, in terms of the recreational, this is statewide legislation.
I think the maintenance was a bigger deal.
As far as maintenance is definitely a key thing.
I think statewide, I wrote a letter to Governor Newgard actually about it, or sent him an email, and he had me come to Pier and meet with some different people up there, and he's really interested in expanding this. You know, I know he's an advocate for it. But he also said it's going to rely a lot on grassroots efforts too, and again, you know, it's funding. It all boils down, you know, however we can do that. What are the other states? I mean, besides state income taxes and such, I don't know how they are doing it. You know, and I do wonder about those bikes that the big cities are getting. Where are they getting the bikes? Are they making any money, or is it being a liability? I wonder about that.
I always assumed they were private companies when I looked at them in big cities.
But would it have to be? Could a company?
I don't know. I just always looked at them if it was somebody's business venture and they were paying a rent or something to be in a certain location and maintaining the bikes and taking care of the ones that get stolen. And
I know before I worked at the county, I worked at the city of Sioux Falls, and at the time the mayor had wanted there to be a bike rental facility at Falls Park, and they couldn't find any private vendors to put one up, and so they let a contract and basically tried to subsidize for I think 2 summers a private company to come to Falls Park and rent out bicycles. And so the way that it was bid was how much money will I need from the city of Sioux Falls to go operate my company at Falls Park, and the lowest bidder would win. And I don't know whatever happened to that program, if it's still being used today or not, I'm not sure. That was probably 5 years ago, or 6 years ago maybe.
Well, those bikes they have it like in Washington D.C. and Minneapolis, and Chicago. Those are not fancy bikes; they are heavy-duty bikes. You know, they are really sturdy bikes. I don't know if the city's own them or who owns them.
It's a private operation. Capital Bike Share is done through all its planning. They're the ones that ultimately have it. It's a separate entity.
when you were talking about the rural service centers back earlier, does it matter if a town is or isn't on the list? I got to put my hometown on hat on because I didn't know why Garrison wasn't listed.
Because Garrison is its own municipality. So the rural service centers are...
Didn't listen good enough, evidently.
Yeah, are those communities that were once incorporated and are now or not, or never were, and are becoming communities in of themselves. So.
I didn't listen good enough. It makes sense now.
Are there any comments on the goals or action steps that, in any of the chapters that struck your mind, or anything that you think that might need to be reworded or changed, phrased in a different way? Try to put those together based on some of the input that's been received so far, and put it together into a document format. So.
Is this information shared with like ST Sharing Days? They do their, with their civil engineers and with their with the planning and even the tours with agritourism and such. Is it shared? So
Currently,
yeah.
We were just told to put it online just recently, so and the drafts have not necessarily been posted, but yeah, it'll be online and ready to go for anybody who requests some visits. As soon as we make updates from now on, and including the final copy.
I have a question about the non-motorized portion of the transportation plan. There isn't any bicycle plan for Minnehaha County outside of the MPO right now. And I'm wondering if that is intended to be part of this Envision 2035.
I think that was more or less kind of along the lines what I kind of envisioned with citizen-led work groups. Whether that could be a potential option, and where we survey the public and get their opinions on what do you want. Do you want something like this, or would this be of interest?
Maybe a little more forceful though, and say it is going to be an item as part of this plan, instead of just assuming there's a work group that'll be created and you survey them. I mean, I think we need to be a little more progressive and say this is something we want for our county.
So we make a master plan for that, and kind of adopt a peace community, adopt a trail or something.
I mean, like DJ was saying, I mean, we have a plan for the MPO. Why can't we continue to expand that plan within the county?
I think it would be more useful if it was developed by a group such as this, rather than a citizen-led group, because a citizen-led group isn't really going to care about our operations necessarily. They might just say, oh, it'd be great to have 365 miles of bike trail alongside of a county highway. Well, that's obviously not going to happen. And so if we would be part of that discussion and implementation, it might be more successful that way.
Will Rails to Trails, the Rails to Trails organization help out with some of that too? The ones
That would be specifically for the ones who are abandoned
on the abandoned
railroad.
railroad.
As far as the funding on rural bike trails, could the permit process work? If you want to ride your bikes on Minnehaha County bike trails, you have to have a permit?
No, I mean, as far as, I was just reading through some of the things as far as the recreational,
You want to ride snowmobile?
recreational law that
permit, right?
releases the liability, and one of the key things is you don't charge for a fee to use the trails.
Once you
And
charge,
that
you
releases
assume
the liability to the landowner who uses it. Just things I'm looking at are potential rails with trails opportunities could be an option to explore it in terms of that. And all 50 states that would release the liability to both parties, and nobody would have to bear that burden. As far as, because just thinking off some examples, the Silver Lake Trail in Minnesota, they put it along the rail, and it's a 100-foot right-of-way where they have like a 30-foot separation from the center of the rail line to the edge of the trail. It's like an 8 to 10-foot section wide. So that could be a possibility.
And who assumes liability on the rail tracks?
No one does. The landowner is released of the liability because of this recreational use.
So it's not part of the rail line itself.
Recreational use statute.
It's not part of the rail line. It's actual private landowners who are putting the bike trails.
So it's put a lot. It's a rails of trails in this recreational use statute, which all 50 states have it. As long as you don't charge for a fee, then the liability there's an exception to.
Constructed adjacent to the rail.
Yes, parallel.
Yeah, you have 100 foot of right of way, so.
Yeah, so it's private landowners who are constructed as the rail.
In the railroad right of way.
But it's in the railroad right
Yeah.
away.
That's what I understand. 100-foot right of way is uncommon. I mean, it's in a lot of places it's much smaller. Which is a complication.
In the last chapter, the environmental stewardship chapter, I see that the crowd has changed a little bit since our last task force meeting. We did discuss a little bit about conservation easements, say around rivers, since buffers would provide multiple benefits to the county, such as flood controls. It would prevent people from building in the floodplain. It would also allow things for like recreation, a trail around that sort of easement along the river. So, hey, 7,500 foot easement along the river, you can get a pretty good trail. Do something like that. That'd be another option as well. It was discussed at some length the last task force. But with mixed review.
Article 1, build on floodplains?
There is development. There's development permits that you can get from FEMA for as long as you're not changing the floodplain. Say if you're not changing how it's going to flood, and it's not going to flood a structure, there's certain developments you're allowed to do. That's kind of what Sioux Falls did. They put the bike trail around the river, so that way, when it floods the bike trail, not the houses.
Scott, or maybe Commissioner Kelly, do you guys know if the commission is going to support any significant funding towards recreation trails in the future?
I don't think it's anything we've discussed, really.
I don't think, no, there hasn't been any discussion on it.
You know our money issue.
Yeah.
It was kind of a rhetorical question. But I think it's a question that should be asked. I mean, everybody's got great ideas about these wonderful bike trails, and I would love to go ride them. But realistically,
The county's not in a position.
the county's not in a position to fund them.
When will they ever be?
I doubt it, unless the legislature changes the way we do it.
Right. So you're gonna, if you want bike trail, you're gonna have to go to a different direction for funding,
Well,
right?
you know, this town has pretty good bike trails, now I admit Minneapolis and some of the others probably have better, but it's like the rumble strips out on
151.
151. You know, you can only do so much, and you know, you get the real hard advocates again. It's a little myopic, and they just look at that one area. And, when you look at the bridges, the roads, the things we already have to do in the county, there's not a lot of excess money to do these kind of things. And we totally depend on the property tax. We're fortunate to be able to fund our highways through the real tax and registration fees. We're the only county in the state that does it. But and we've always tried to stay away from property tax coming from the highway governor's transportation bill may allow $1.20. But again, that goes back to all the taxpayers. So I don't see it in the cards. I can only speak for myself. That would be my guess after 6 years. And maintenance. I mean, you know, the cost, you guys already talked about the ongoing cost, not just the building. It's just like the jail we're going to have to build. It's not so much the building as it is, you know, the operational cost afterwards, which will greatly exceed what we're going to build. But, you know, having dreams is nothing wrong with that.
Well, and I think about my own family. We never use the bike trails in Sioux Falls. We live out of town. We just don't use them because it's just a hassle to load them all the bikes up and kids and haul them all into town. When you think about like connecting Brandon and Harrisburg to Sioux Falls on bike trails sort of thing, I think it would get heavily used.
I do too. I get really hungry for places to ride horses too. You know, horse and bike trails and horses don't always work out because the bikes can zoom around corners and scare the horse.
And the bike trail that the MPO has adopted does hook in those, you know, it does talk about going to T and Harrisburg and Brandon, and I think, you know, not that I want to sound like I'm deflecting work, but I mean, really, the MPO has adopted a very good bike trail that I think addresses a lot of needs that the community has. We're hooking up small communities like, you know, Hartford and some of these other communities. That's not to say that we can't later go and put together a plan, a wish list of how we might want to connect this to, let's say, Garrettson or Del Rapids.
You get the closer communities done first, get that set up, and then you start broadening it out, and it shows the use, you know, how much you should get out of it.
You know, and it can help the economy of those small communities. If you're riding out to Lyons or wherever, you know, and you need a pop when you get there, you know, or candy bar or something, just little bits here and there can help. You know, or maybe there can end up being a coffee shop or a bakery out there where you go out and get your great muffin or something.
And that's part of, I put together that transportation survey and just kind of leapfrog back into that. It's kind of what I had in mind in terms of getting that message out to the public and surveying them in terms of maybe we can even send this out, or we can send out a link and survey link and have that and answer some of those questions as far as we can get a turnout and based off of zip codes we can understand what areas are the priorities and what we should work on. And I think it's something that should be addressed, and I think it has been in terms of what's come out of some of the feedback that's been going on for over the last 2 years since this process started. So I believe.
You know, where there's a will, there's a way, you guys. We just have to figure out how to do it, right?
That's partially correct, but it's also the availability of man hours in like our planning office. When you look at the benefit that study is going to get is going to yield, as opposed to the benefit maybe of a corridor study between like we did with Red Rock Corridor, and instead do a corridor study from maybe here to Hartford, because Hartford is growing. I mean, you have to look at it, what's going to be the bigger bang for the buck that the county's spending on man hours to do the study. You know, I think that corridor study between here and Hartford is going to rise above usefulness, I'm saying, as opposed to a bike trail. And
generate more income in it.
Well, not income. I think it's going to.
Put over time in the building.
It'll generate a better planned community. I mean, and that's really what we want, is a better looking community and a more thought out community. And that's what we do with our Red Rock Corridor study. And I think that's one of the things I think we're going to look at when we're done with this, is moving into another corridor study whether that's, you know, the 115 corridor that goes up to Del Rapids, or whether that's going to be the Hartford corridor, or if it's going to be West Highway 42 out to Wall Lake. I mean, because that's changing out there too with the Cherry Lake subdivision and other things that are going on out there that, you know, there may be some usefulness for that. So, I mean, we have to start to take all those into consideration.
Here's something kind of neat. I just came from having 8th graders at West Central and showing me out there. They want to have, there's a sign of what, in Hartford now, the city planning meeting coming up. And the 8th graders want to have the city planner come to their class and talk to them. I think that's really neat. I think that young people are interested in that.
Just remember when, you know, when you look at the city, you look at a dream list, and you look at the city, and the city has 2 cents sales tax. And so all the growth flows right down to that 2 cents in the county. Unless the law changes significantly, and there's no reason to believe that anybody in here is interested in doing it. The county's always going to be strapped. Counties all over the United States are strapped on money. And so those things that seem so neat in town can be achieved in town, but the ability of the county to achieve those is going to be much more limited. And I think, you know, even though you should dream big, the thing is you got to be realistic in what we can do too. And as you develop this plan, as you develop this vision, you know, maybe this will follow. But it would still take, the county has not got any excess funds to do it, and I don't see it for the next few years.
Has anybody ever come up with even a broad estimate of what it would cost to put in a bike trail system in the county?
What is the city spending?
I just saw this number earlier this week, actually. I think it's something like $45,000 per mile.
Bike trail?
That's for gravel.
That's gravel bike trail?
Yeah.
So then you go find
We're meeting tomorrow at the Falls Area Bicycle Club. We're meeting tomorrow with the Falls Area Bicycle Club, and they wanted to talk about that information. So the briefing materials that were given, and we had that number in. So 45,000. So that's gravel.
I visited with Ronnie Peterson in Lake County, that area. He said the biggest expense is your, I just lost the word there, the right-of-way stuff. You know,
Buying easements, you mean, or?
acquisition of right-of-way.
So you gotta buy the acquisition right of ways.
Because I think he's looking at making bike trails and stuff. That's where the big dollars come.
So it's a lot of money.
A $75 million total budget for Will County. $5 million a month.
Well, and what's a lot more feasible than
That's not that many miles.
And that doesn't.
a lot more feasible would be to widen the roadway and have a wider shoulder, and that multi-use area would be beneficial for most riders. It wouldn't be beneficial for a family to go on a bike ride. But most of the time, families aren't going to be going on a 20-mile road bike ride. And so, I think it's more feasible to look at wider shoulders, and those costs would be probably smaller than $45,000 or more if you were to pay them.
Wide shoulder is how they're connecting Harrisburg to Sioux Falls on 115. The Highway 115 project south of Harrisburg, that's how they're connecting the trail. Connecting Harrisburg to Sioux Falls to the bike trail system of Sioux Falls is providing a wider shared use shoulder on 115.
That was kind of the final solution, you know, for the garrisons, you know, the Highway 11, and they came up with a wider shoulder. It was going to be pretty wide anyway, but some signage to let people know that bikes are there and try to be in concert with each other.
Is that what they did then?
Yeah, there's some signs there along the way. It's got a wider shoulder on it.
See any bikes on it?
Yeah, he runs every once in a while, but not nothing crazy. Every once in a while there'll be an event going and you'll notice there's a bunch of them. But as a rule, in the summertime, I drive that road a lot. You see sporadic bicyclists.
Just think that area, what's that called, that road up to Baltic and River Road, what's that?
That's right.
Are there any federal programs that are comparable to, like where the different things that, farmers get in the mail, like if you let people come and hunt you or whatever, or like with the shelter belt programs and all of those things too, anything like that federally available for developing bike trails and such without, grants? Yeah. Grants or what are some of those federal programs where they have that cost share and stuff like that?
Then definitely in a cash-strapped county, that would be a good way to pursue things. I think there was one type of grant, I can't remember where I saw it, and even if it was particular for, it was like a 40% that county would have to come, or the community would have to come up with, and the 60% would be paid for. So that would all cut our bike trail down to less than 20,000 a mile. That would help a lot.
I guess we're getting down to the end, so I want to take this opportunity to certainly thank you while I pull this up. Just some of the next steps that have been thrown around with staff, Scott, Kevin, and I, is wondering, and the Planning Commission as well, is should we have an open house or a couple of them in some dates or at a certain location, and what would those dates be, and what's the notification? How would we go about getting that word out there? Is it necessary? We would have to give that presentation to the CCOG, to the Citizen Advisory Commission, the technical advisory, and the urbanized development elected officials. Then ultimately it'd be up to the Planning Commission elected official review. Just I wanted to get your thoughts, and if you could just take some time and give us your opinions and thoughts.
Would this be to present what has been completed, or is it still seeking more input?
This would be more of a completion.
The open house ideas would be more of a completion, and what's been completed so far.
Showing them the final product, getting any input that they have, that type of thing. And just to recap, we have had several open houses in the formulation of this plan. We've had one in Brandon, Del Rapids, West Central. We had one in Humboldt, a couple back in October. So we have had several public hearings, some of them better attended than others, but when you adopt a comprehensive plan, just to recap, under South Dakota state law, you have to have a public hearing of the comprehensive plan before the Planning Commission. They make a recommendation, and then there's another public hearing in front of the elected county commissioners. So there will be, that's mandatory that you have those public hearings. Now, if you want to have another open house, that's something that you need to let us know, and we can have another open house, show them the final product. We could do that here. We could do it someplace. We could find a location. But what are your thoughts?
The ones that were well attended, was there a reason why one was more well attended than the other? Was there a hot issue there? Or?
Well, I don't know if I can necessarily say, but we had very good attendance in Del Rapids, and we had very good attendance at West Central. The attendance that we had in Brandon was not bad. I mean, we probably had 20 or 30 people there. In Humboldt, we didn't have very good attendance. But, it takes, I think you have to do a lot of work. You have to do mailers. I mean, you have to send out postcards. You have to do something. If you just put a public hearing notice in the paper, you don't get anyone. So it's tough. But getting that word out and getting people to participate is the hard part. And some people just have no interest in seeing the plan. I mean, I don't know. Dick, what are your thoughts? What do you want to see?
Well, I think you gotta make your success.
You have to work hard for it.
It's not a bill that will come. That's a dream. It's the same way in politics. For example, fundraising, you got to make it work. You can't just send out a letter and say, "Come on, down this." So people are busy. They're very busy. And then when you got both parents working, time is precious. I think they're good, though, and it doesn't surprise me that Dells and West Central would be the more successful ones.
Why?
Why? Oh, I think just the dynamics of those communities. They're more of a bedroom town community than they are than the others. I think Brandon has its own thing going. And, yeah, you think it'd be a good turnout there, but Brandon sees itself as a community in itself. I think. I don't know. If I live there, I think that's the way I live there too. But this is good. This is our vision for the next 20 years, and when you're talking about the bike, I think that somewhere you got to include that this can do what we recognize the problem of finances in the county. We have to have a plan that people can look at and say, hey, I'd like to see these businesses built out in the county rather than in the city of Sioux Falls. I'd like to get the building permits here. And so I think the open houses will try to be good, or at least one. And I think you get a presenter that really can do a good job of just showing where this thing is going and take some public input. The Red Rock corridor, they were all well attended.
They were all well attended. Bonnie and Brooke were on that.
Stuff, and you did a lot of advertising.
We did a lot of advertising. But we were also riding the wave of public interest because of the casino.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's what drove the corridor, and there was a lot of interest on what's going to happen to that strip. That's right. We had the benefit of momentum going on there, and so I think there was a lot of interest in that. And what helped us was, if you recall, the paper, the Argus Leader, followed that closely, and they were able to well advertise the meetings. And so, when you send out a press release, no matter how fancy you word it, that you're having an open house on a comp plan, they're not going to write a story on it. And that's what benefited us with that Red Rock corridor, is you had, the interest of the casino, and the paper picked up on it.
There was just an article yesterday in the paper, wasn't there, about bike stuff, I think. There was an article, I think, yesterday, something about bike. But I'm just wondering if the Argus Leader, I read something.
Well, you got an editor down there that was really biking big time. I think that affects a lot of that.
I think the word yesterday, so maybe it would be good to put the Argus at the end of this even discussion we had.
So is it the sort of the consensus of the group that you want us to have one more open house and we pick a location? Or
Yeah, I think it'd be good.
okay.
That's going to be the key, is the right location.
Yeah, and any
It's got to be
ideas?
something where you can make the presentation that people are comfortable sitting and it's convenient to everybody. Obviously, the people in Sioux Falls are
No.
so it's got to be like a West Central.
Well, it sounds to me like on past meetings, it would be either north or in the Red Rock corridor area. But if the majority, if the most interest comes from the north, then I think that's where it ought to happen, somewhere.
Garrison Dells.
Somewhere, yeah.
Okay. Well, then I think that's the consensus. We'll have another public open house, and we'll either have it at West Central or or Del Rapids. West Central, we had good turnout, so, and that's sort of more centrally located in the county, so we could try for that, and we'll work the newspapers hard to see if we can get them to give us
See if
some
you
stories.
give a story about the next 20-year vision
Yeah.
county or something.
Yeah. Okay. All right, and we'll probably plan that for March. I mean, you don't want to.
Be careful you don't get around harness basketball.
Yeah. Yeah, so maybe after the basketball season's over, the end of March, and then you're sort of out of that window of nasty weather, or potentially. Hopefully. I mean, we've had ice storms, in April, but typically, we may even look for the first part, the end of March, 1st of April. Does that sound okay for everyone? I mean, I don't want to stall
A little
this.
later than 1st April, because then you get into the ag season.
Yeah, that's right.
So.
But people are starting to take bikes.
Yeah.
That's
So everyone think the end of March is going to be okay? That's basically, you're looking at 6 weeks from now.
That
give
gives
us
enough time to put
Yeah.
one together.
Yeah, that'll give us more time to really work the newspapers and see what we can get.
Maybe the TV stations pick up some attention.
public service stuff.
Let them know that we're
Okay.
doing an open house deal, and maybe they would,
Okay. Well, we'll look at. We'll send out. We'll.
get a news clip or something on it. You just never know.
Okay.
They're always looking for news stories, right? So,
They are.
huh?
They are.
QV's always
The
looking
stuff
for
you're
news.
reading there is not there by accident.
Are there any more shows coming up out at the, like the outdoor sports show, all these different shows? What shows are coming up? The farm shows going on
That's
right
going
now?
this week.
Home show, but it's expensive to get a booth there. The lawn and garden, which is diminishing because they moved it. It was at the convention center, and they've sort of lost some of their following, I've heard. But the what do you call it? The home show is bigger, but it's expensive to get a booth there.
Outdoorsman shows, sportsman shows, and all that kind of stuff.
You can't even have posters and stuff like that without a booth or anything.
For advertisement somehow.
And I also.
TV, paper.
Well, I think those community newspapers are probably, two of them are owned by the artists, but still, that's where you're gonna be able to get the booth.
Oh, and I forgot to tell you that, remind everyone, we had a booth at the fair, and we were there every day, both weekends. That's when, and it was throughout the week, and we had hundreds of people. But I don't want to wait till August for the fair. But we did have a lot of people that we ran through, talked to at the fair. So I think the public, the community is aware that we're doing this. We'll work on getting them to another a public open house, and then after that we'll take it to the planning commission. We're also we talked about that, David, too, today, about having sort of an informational session at our planning commission meeting in February, and giving them the final product, and then that will be preparing them for the hearing in front of them probably in April. I suppose if we have our meeting at the end of March, we'll have our public hearing before the planning commission in April. We'll go to Southeast Council probably in that April time period, March. I'm not sure when they meet, what their schedule is. We'll get on the agenda though.
So all this discussion today about bikes, is it the opportunity for anything to be put in here? Is it going to be based on this next open house and people out in the county saying, I don't see anything in here specific to bikes that would drive an addition to this? Or are we really, the discussion that we had today is just that discussion, and it really has no bearing on this document?
Do you want us to add? I mean, you want
I guess
something added?
that's what I would like to know, because I feel like we spent an hour here, and I think the majority of the discussion was about bikes and how we can implement trails into our county. And so I feel like there's a genuine concern for that topic. But if we're at the end of the line and it's too late, then I guess I'd like to know that now versus waiting to see what the end product is and then say, there's nothing in here about bikes. We
Can you
spent
put that
all that
document up
time
there?
talking and we didn't, it's not in here.
What? What part of it?
The document that you're referring to, put that up there.
This part?
Do you have the chapter?
Yeah.
Is that what you're looking for?
Yeah, the chapter,
The,
right?
yeah, the chapters, we don't have them specifically on the PowerPoint. This is just the PowerPoint presentation.
Oh, okay.
So this is a very abridged version of what's in the chapter. Where did we pass it? No,
Your non-motorized stuff.
so yeah.
You know, I think of what this bike trails will do, not only in the development of community, but I think of it's part of the health of the community too. You know, the health of our kids and families and such. Although I don't think we should name it Sanford.
Are there existing utility easements that connect Sioux Falls with these other towns? And if there are, can we piggyback on those other easements?
Typically, if a private utility easement is only for that specific private utility, like if Xcel Energy were to get an easement on private property, it would only be for their utility, not for other utilities.
Or other uses.
Or other uses. Generally in rural settings, unless it's a really big system, such as a big power line, they're in the right of way, they're not on private property.
So what's not in this document that?
Well, we talked about just having a master plan,
Oh,
you know, to actually have some type of map that's showing what is our plan for the 20 years out. Maybe we don't have the funding today, but this is for 20 years. This isn't like the next 5.
Could be
You know, you could put
that be
together,
added?
yeah, some kind of map that shows
Proposed
this is
map.
what we think is a proposed map is a stepping stone for 20 years from now when they're making another plan. Here's the stepping stone. They took the time and the effort to create something for us to jump off from.
I think that's a good idea, to have a master plan.
So you want that added in there?
That's just my suggestion because I feel like there's been so much discussion here at this meeting that it's a worthwhile item to be added to the plan,
Well,
to the document.
I mean,
That would be a great visual, that would help people.
it would, but what I want to know, I guess what we need to know for direction is how many of you want that, how many are opposed to it? Because at the last meeting, we had some discussion about the greenways and the open space along the Big Sioux River, and it was totally, I mean, there was a totally different atmosphere at this meeting than the last meeting that said, you know, we don't want that. So, I mean, we're getting sort of mixed messages from the task force, and am I wrong with that? I mean,
didn't we change the wording there in there though that on the Greenway document, didn't we change the wording in there that we thought the county should promote? We changed
it
the
was
wording.
like changing it. It was a softer word, is how we changed it.
Was it a
because
softer
it was
word?
acquired. It was land in the greenways, and we changed that to like promote.
Okay, so we softened it down. Is that what it was? Okay.
because we can put together a more fleshed out bike trail plan and include that. And I mean, if that's what you want, we can put that together and include it in the document. Okay. Is that what you want then? I guess I'd like to sort of see a show of hands. Who wants that?
I think it's a good idea.
Okay.
Rob.
All right.
And it could always be revised if you go to the public things and they get other ideas or something. It doesn't have to be set in stone.
We can
absolutely.
we can put something in there. We have 6 weeks. You know, we have another month. We can work on it.
So with that plan, what town would you? How far out would you?
Well, I think what we'd like to do is connect up.
To the communities that already have systems.
Yes, which would be Del Rapids. It would go out to Hartford, and you know, maybe a trail that would go out to Wall Lake, and one that would sort of go up to Garrettson. I mean, I sort of see that's, spoking out that way from Sioux Falls. I think it's tough to hook up everything in the county. I mean, you're not going to go to Colton. You're not going to be able to, ideally, it would have been nice to have it run right along the Big Sioux River all the way up through Baltic, Sioux Falls, Baltic, Del Rapids, and that might be the way we run it. And if we get the money, great. Because that would be the best trail.
I think, you connect those points, and I think they're going to have to look at other funding mechanisms. I mean, there may be county participation, but also you're going to have some communities. Because the purpose is to kind of tie into the Sioux Falls network of bike trails. At least that's what we're thinking. And, private, public, and intergovernmentals the arts and so I think Brandon and Sioux Falls are working together on that connection. So,
okay. We'll put something in there for that then. See what the options are.
Could you also show the other bike trails that are
Yeah, we could show those.
Show what else is going on, so people don't think, well, why didn't Brandon?
We can show what I would call I don't want to show all the city bike trails because the scale of our maps is you're not going to see anything. I can show the connections between Brandon and Sioux Falls, and we don't really. It's a county plan, and of course T is on the wrong side. Is down in there, and we don't really have the mapping to show that. We can, but it just makes our maps.
One you could.
I can show the Brandon one.
Yeah.
We can put that in there.
Maybe take a look at that existing MPO plan that they have. It's outdated, but they do have some routes identified in there, and the way that they came up with those routes as far as the prioritization of different segments.
We'll put something together, and we can email it to you, the draft copy, before the public hearings in March. Is that okay? All right.
I think so.
Okay.
Scott?
Yeah.
The open house, are you going to keep us informed about where it's going to be?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
Are you going to have visuals like you had?
Yeah, we're going to have a PowerPoint presentation, and we will have draft copies of the plan for people to take. We'll have information on the internet site. We'll have information on how to get to the internet to look at meetings, minutes, draft maps, whatever. But it's really, the open house is going to be to show off the final product. Not necessarily to, of course people will give us their input on stuff, but they're not going to really have time to read it beforehand unless they're smart enough. And a lot of people are very savvy. They may go to the website and look at it. And that might be something that we can put in the press release, that if you're interested in looking at this beforehand, go to the website, here's where all the chapters are located.
Before you do the final acceptance, could this have a draft proposal that would allow
Some flexibility.
some flexibility, and then you'll become wait a minute, I got calls going for hearing aids. But it'll be a presentation of not the final, but the draft, and this is what the final is probably going to look like.
That's right, yeah. And if there's strong opposition, we can incorporate that before we take it to the public hearing.
That gives them a sense of purpose of being there.
Yeah, input on the final draft, we'll call it, not the final version, because we have no idea what changes the planning commission may make, or the county commission. Ultimately, the county commission's the last say on what it's going to look like.
Is there a way we can start getting some tweets going? Twitter's how the word spreads.
We could, but we're precluded from doing that at the county.
So it has to be.
We're not allowed to have Twitter accounts at the county, or Facebook accounts, so no one.
So we have to do it.
So the committee member could.
You could do it yourself, but we're not allowed to set them up.
Well, we could put them on ourselves.
You could yourself.
Get the word out, and then we can start tweeting.
Okay.
So what's left for this committee to do?
Well, now it's pretty much at the point where, as needed,
Come to the
and
meetings.
getting the word out about the public meetings. We'll send out notices for that.
As far
Just
as,
spread the word.
Yeah, if we
in terms of
email
word of
out,
mouth.
if we email out a draft, then you can respond to that too, so. Because we don't have emails for everybody, you're the first one to go to.
Do you want to meet again before the public hearing? Or the public open house, I should say, not hearing, the public open house in March? Do you want to meet again before then, or not? Or just, I mean,
if you send it out email, I don't,
okay, we'll just send out everything in email.
unless there's a ton of questions or something, maybe we have to set one up,
Okay.
but otherwise,
Okay. So we'll just go forward towards the open house in March, end of March, after basketball season, and before April 1st. So we'll get the dates. We'll talk to West Central. They've been good about letting us use the school. Then we can open it up, and because that was a very good place to meet. All right. Thank you, guys.
All right.